scholars are appreciating that cultures and societies and the environment and climate continually exert influence on and modify each other in a very recursive and reciprocal relationship. And I think that the Maya are fascinating myself, and I think that they provide a very good case study because you can look at millennia of cultural data. And then with these carved stone monuments, they are so precisely dated using their long count calendar system that we can figure out their recorded events to the specific day. And so that makes it very useful to look at a more fine-grained interpretation of things that might have happened on the ground socially and culturally in response or affecting changes in their natural environment. We wanted to look at how climate change may have played a role in ancient Maya social structures. And so we were lucky and fortunate enough to obtain a speleothem record from southern Belize that gave us an unbroken 2,000-year-long record of paleoclimate for the area. And then we were able to compare that with precise cultural records taken from carved stone monuments that are called stela.
Obviously, it's difficult to talk about the role of climate if you don't have a clear understanding of climate and a very, very good reconstruction of it. So when the Mayan project started, it was very exciting for us because we bring together our expertise in chronology, we bring together our expertise in climate change with those who are doing work on understanding the telltale signs of social, political, and economic changes.
We use mainly stalagmites because of the way they grow. They grow up, and therefore the layers that we use are thick. We date them using uranium series dating, so it's a powerful way of coming up with a robust chronology that we can work with.
Many of the challenges of climate research have to do with time scale, basically. How fast did something occur? How long was its duration? Because those sorts of information allow us to understand some of the dynamical parameters of change. Unlike radiocarbon, for example, which is a wonderful tool for the last 50,000 years, we can do close to 500,000 years, and that gives us the long time scale changes that have impacted climate over Earth history.
So our 2,000-year record of paleoclimate for the Maya lowlands, taken from southern Belize, showed that there were a series of severe droughts that had occurred at the cusp of the 9th century AD. And these coincided with dramatic political and social reconfigurations of Maya society, including widespread abandonment of many centers throughout the lowlands. In addition to that, we noticed a broadly drying trend, which we hypothesized had mediated agricultural productivity, which has very physical significance for an agrarian population. If what you're doing is precipitation-based maize agriculture, then rainfall and the timing of rainfall is going to be of paramount importance to your crop yields, to your predictability of the growing season, and then that has cascading consequences for tribute to kings, for example. And what we see after that is a dramatic reorganization of settlements where you don't have these really large aggregations of populations in a city. You don't have massive monumental construction. The political traditions that they'd been exercising for hundreds of years, like making these stela, completely disappear. So although some people might think that the ancient Maya civilization was kind of a foreign civilization that might seem so different from what we have today, there's actually quite a lot of analogs, because during the classic period they struggled with some similar challenges that we're facing today, with exploding populations and territorial extent being reached to capacity. And then when you have these kinds of contexts and established behaviors that haven't encountered such frequency of environmental perturbations, then it's going to be much harder to adopt new behaviors quickly to mitigate some of the potential crises.
The decisions that they made, I mean, in the birth of the automobile, to go with a gasoline-powered car as opposed to an electric car, which existed, they could have taken different roads, and the result we have is long-term planning, for better or worse. At no point when we were making decisions about infrastructure were we trying to make our lives more difficult. Our highway system, our sewer system, all these things were built with the future in mind. And so I just hope that we continue to do that and realize that that's the responsibility of our leaders and our representatives. I think everybody in their hearts is trying to work in the best interest of society if you're making those decisions. And now we have all this information, so if we use it, we can again work in the best interest of society. And that might include admitting that we've made some mistakes in the plannings of our cities and our urban spaces and our choices for crops and our use of the oceans.
Climate change is very location specific. You have to take into consideration the country, its people, its current infrastructure systems, its urban systems, their stability, their complexities, and provide adaptations that are location and context specific. You cannot generalize climate change. It is difficult to do so, and when it's done, it usually leaves gaps that are not addressed and further implications for different population groups.
Ordinary people who live in poverty, people who do not have resources to get what they need, and they have to live in areas that are abandoned by the city, they experience hugely the impact of the climate change.
Whether you have issues of flooding or drought or even secondary factors that come from this, things like war over resources and resource rights. That's something that's becoming increasingly prominent as often indigenous communities have lost access to some of these places, and they've largely been the stewards of the land in the past.
The inequity is definitely within the southern hemisphere, and I don't think there is enough stepping up to the plate by northern countries, especially in North America.
You see the conflict between indigenous communities' rights to the land, right to hunt and have clean air and clean water, rights that really all Canadians appreciate and agree with, but those really give them additional opportunity to take care of the land and stop occasionally things like pipelines or mines that may in the short term be beneficial to the economy but really cause long-term damage to these goals of protecting and nurturing these resources so that future generations can use them.
Everything's connected when it comes to climate change. Our whole ecosystem is around climate and energy. But one of the big connectors is forest and deforestation, not only on a mitigation level in terms of capturing carbon, but also on an ecosystem level in terms of water security for communities, wildlife security, deep carbon storage eventually, and as well as food security for communities. Whether it be preventing soil erosion or managing flood systems, forested areas around it can help absorb floods and mitigate their impact on cities. You have coastal wetlands and coastal plant life that can help protect you from tides. We need to address this at a global level because forests and the benefits they bring are really a global benefit to mitigation and to managing our ecosystems.
Well, I'm a hydrologist with an interest in wetlands, and that has focused largely on the restoration of degraded systems and more currently on the creation of new wetland systems. Peatlands in particular are important for long-term carbon accumulation. The peat soil which is accumulated over the last 5 to 8 millennia represents a significant proportion of the terrestrial carbon. It's the largest terrestrial carbon sink, in fact. And then, as a consequence of urban development, agriculture, and now particularly resource development, a lot of these systems have become degraded. Some of them impacted directly, for example, as a consequence of harvesting of peat as a horticultural soil amendment. And more recently, particularly in the oil sands region of Alberta, they've been removed entirely to be able to access the bitumen. And so the carbon accumulating function of many of these systems has been completely lost or at least partially lost. And so we're setting about trying to find ways to restore the damaged systems and actually build other systems from scratch. And one of the principal goals is to be able to have these as carbon accumulating systems so that they will be sustainable over the long term.
When it comes to water security, plant life and forests are crucial, both for the water cycle and for promoting evaporation of water and rainfall, but also just for lowering temperatures. For example, near Mount Kilimanjaro, part of the reason that the glaciers are melting is the deforestation around it, and unfortunately the water supply for a lot of these communities comes from these glaciers. And that's not just in Mount Kilimanjaro, in Peru, and many other areas this is the case as well.
You could say that in the developed world, City of Toronto, Vancouver, Europe are much more prepared to climate change impacts than other cities, for example, Dhaka, Bangladesh.
From Dhaka, Bangladesh. It's a country, the tropical area, so we have flooding, but because of global warming, it's becoming more extreme. Crops are destroyed, many people become homeless, you can't go to school, you can't go to work, it's like disaster. Dirty water too, like sewage water, so from that you can get like diarrhea and like other stuff because you drink that water and like you're on that water all the time, so you might get like rashes on your legs and hands, like that's possible.
I consider global health to be one of the major issues right now. The floodings are causing direct and indirect impacts, people lose their lives and livelihood because of those. But what comes after that is like we have contaminated water situation, we have food crisis, and that kind of creates scarcity in food and water, and that also exacerbates the already existing diseases in those areas like malaria, like dengue. Climate change is not just one nation's problem, it's not just one individual's problem, it's a problem of the entire globe. Countries which have more financial assistance, they should actually contribute, help out the most vulnerable nations.
If you're based on short-term economic returns, that's problematic not only for your own community, but it's kind of not holding up your end of the bargain.
One of the problems with traditional funding strategies is that there's always money channeled in, and you have to show a set part of results to prove that you're using this funding wisely. And while there should be some specifications on how money should be allocated, I think we need to be more flexible and allow for countries to kind of experiment, to innovate, to adapt to their own environments.
Cities who are in the forefront of climate change research are going to be much more prepared for its impact. Developing urban centers have more of an advantage because their infrastructures are still precarious and unstable. They have more of a leeway to redevelop their infrastructure and provide much more pedestrian-friendly environment, much more public transportation systems.
I think the need for cities to become more densely integrated with each other in terms of transportation is key. It would be great to see a more European model implemented in terms of transportation, buses, and then also more pedestrian-friendly cities and with greater cycle networks. It makes for a much more vibrant city, a more diverse and culturally holistic city, and just one that would hopefully attract sort of more economic revenue, tourism, that sort of thing in the future, and just being a more economically viable place to be.
I think that one of the challenges is that in this big dialogue, it's all about like the international consensus. When really this kind of global governance framework really needs to start empowering bottom-up approaches where we see a lot of action happening. And so part of what I think needs to happen is actually talking about best practices on how countries are doing and empowering their own communities to address some of these issues.
Some of the largest corporate interests, some of the largest organizations, you know, in both the for and nonprofit sectors have become a little too focused on technological solutions, and I fear that world leaders are also starting to take this as the quick way out, and there's really a risk, like we've seen with experiments moving too quickly, such as flushing the oceans with iron really quickly to hope that, you know, phytoplankton blooms will, you know, take away all that CO2 and put it into the ocean floor. That didn't really work out. And so for one, we need to have some regulations and policy in place so that while it may be urgent climate change, that doesn't give us a right to rush technology and rush solutions. Solutions should always be carefully managed and carefully planned. And so I think technology really should follow the precautionary principle, just as we've applied it to all of our natural systems.
The world is becoming more global as days are going by. What you do in Canada or US affects countries in Africa and like Asia, like Bangladesh, so you have to be responsible. Like, it's because of you they're suffering. If you didn't have so much carbon dioxide or like other greenhouse emissions, we won't have that in the first place. So we are suffering because of those things. So you have to think as a global perspective, and the only solution is to like become like to go for more a green approach. They have to cut down emissions.
I would say the most important thing that policymakers should focus on at this conference parties and going forward would be developing a method to facilitate the transition through both national economies and a global economy from the heavy reliance on fossil fuels and carbon-intensive industry.
We know that industries that are emitting carbon dioxide is bad for the environment, and we know these things. We're educated enough.
It seems we're sort of stuck in the oil bubble, and as everyone knows, the oil's not going to last forever, and it seems like we're stuck, we're addicted to this source of energy.
Carbon technologies get subsidies that are several-fold higher than renewable technologies. This is still allowed for a private sector boom in these technologies. Solar has dropped by more than 99% in cost over the last 30 years. Wind energy is becoming increasingly implemented with modest subsidies, and if governments even reallocated the subsidies and incentives that are currently going to fossil fuel technologies towards renewable, sustainable technologies, it could really see a far more rapid development of technologies and incorporation and deployment by the private sector, reflecting shifting market conditions.
If we actually switch to green energy, we would reduce carbon emissions, methane emissions. We would help lower the likelihood of rising sea level to affect all of the coastal communities in the world. We would just have so much power and potential to solve this if we were collaboratively, as a world, working on this together.
More energy is locked in the solar radiation that hits the planet in 1 year than is locked in all the fossil fuel reserves on the planet. And looking at historical expenditure, massive amounts of money have been spent in the development of carbon technologies and nuclear technologies. Adjusted for inflation, the Manhattan Project has gotten more investment than solar technology has in the history of the technology. But one area that definitely needs to be improved within renewable technologies is storage capacity. There is really interesting work being done in battery technology and storage capacity. Increased storage technology, especially when integrated in advanced smart microgrids in the city scope, allows for the really rapid incorporation of renewable technologies, especially at the decentralized local scale. Those technologies can more than meet the demands at the moment and store more to meet the demands for later on. It's certainly a feasible technology to completely phase out this reliance on carbon technologies. So the impacts of climate change fundamentally undermine our capacity for sustainable economic development, and our energy system structure, because it's so reliant on fossil fuels, exacerbate the impacts of climate change. The two are fundamentally opposed.
I mean, China already see the result of the pollution. People are kind of suffering from a lot of healthy issues, and maybe China can do something with better deal with the garbage, because the garbage separation in China is not doing so well. We often burn all the garbage. It's resolve a lot of pollution.
Our big cities such as Beijing, Shanghai, and provinces, they are covered by the smogs all year long. You cannot barely see clear when you live in the city.
Carbon-intensive industries have every responsibility to clean up all of their messes, and you know what? I don't even think that's good enough. Cleaning up the mess and making it the same as what it was before, why do that? Why not make it better?
I think that businesses change the way they operate, or they implement different types of corporate social responsibility more as a reaction to outside pressures, not because it's really part of their business strategy.
I think oftentimes with the climate change crisis, we feel really disconnected if we're not in places that are directly affected. But with divestment, it's one way to feel really like that you can have action. A lot of people focus on the more symbolic victories that divestment has had, but recently we've been seeing as more divestment victories have been happening, that it's actually making an impact on the way that fossil fuel companies do their business. Like, we've seen some of the biggest endowment funds, such as Stanford, which is billions of dollars, divest from fossil fuels. Not only is it actually taking out this money, but it's also impacting the public perception and affecting the stock prices. By moving our investments away from fossil fuels, we can also actually invest them in climate solutions.
We have to leave most of these carbon assets in the ground. Continuing to pour these huge sums of money into these infrastructure projects risks enormous stranded assets, wasted investment, and that's money that could be used to develop a economy that will sustain us in the long term.
Giving people choice is a very powerful way of getting the ball rolling and getting everything moving before you need policy incentives. We support renewable energy in a bunch of different ways, and one of them is to provide critical financing to community-based renewable projects. So we raise the profile of renewable energy and try to drive a dialogue that is really productive and proactive about supporting renewables across Canada. And generally what we're doing is we're pooling all of the money that we get from our customers and providing critical financing to projects that are micro hydro, they're wind projects, as well as small-scale solar and even biogas as well. We are supporting a project in the far north Lutzel Dene First Nation, who will become the first independent power producer of the Northwest Territories, using solar electricity, where 100% of their current electricity is coming from dirty diesel. And this is a community that only has sunlight half of the year. So for a technology to be able to exist and to work well in such a harsh climate is just unbelievable. The market allows us to move very quickly and just to provide options, and there's no forcing anybody into it. It was literally going out and asking Canadians, do you want to pay more for your electricity? And now we have over 10,000 Canadians that are saying, absolutely, we want to pay more for electricity, as long as we know it's supporting high quality renewable energy. Appropriately accounted for, renewables will be less expensive and are continuing to drop in price. So the more that we can accelerate the market to provide more renewables onto our grids, I think personally that will eventually lead to energy savings. In every little way that we encourage the growth of renewables, we are discouraging the use of fossil fuels because they are more expensive. And as we put more green electrons on the grid, it will push off the more expensive electrons, and those are generally the fossil fuel ones. We have to start now. It's not about anything other than an absolute necessity to create a future that is powered by renewable energy. We don't have another option, I think. We can't keep on burning fossil fuels. And so every tool that we have in our tool belt needs to be used in order to get the ball rolling faster.
Communities are doing just that. They're saying you're going to have unlimited wealth, unlimited jobs, all kinds of great things, and there's going to be no downside. They're telling our people. Sounds too good to be true, right? Well, it is. And that's a hard lesson that our people are learning today. People! Power! People! Power! People! Power! What do we want? Climate justice! When do we want this? Now! What do we want? Climate justice! When do we want it? Now! What do we want? Climate justice! When do we want it? Now! Rise up, rise up, rise up, rise up! Get down, get down! In the ground! In the ground!
The point of getting together in a society is not just to live, but to live well. I think that it can be very difficult for us to know whether a specific thing is right or wrong, whether a specific course of action is better or worse, but that the more we talk about it, the more we offer one another reasons, the more likely we are to get closer to moral truth. Economics is just another way of talking about how we organize our societies.
I think investment practices change social practices all the time. Creating a better life for billions of people on the planet is really in the hands of corporations, much more so than governments.
And even if government resources are deployed in the form of new regulations or restrictions or taxes, still it's the private sector which in many cases has to execute and deliver those low carbon goods and services in a way that they hadn't previously. So there's the opportunity, there's the demand, and yet those private companies can only do that if they can show it makes financial sense.
There are no perfect companies. Just the act of engaging in commercial enterprise is essentially the act of exploiting natural resources and or human capital for the purpose of creating an economic profit. Managed properly, the positives could outweigh the negatives. The differences between how companies in the same industry behave relative to the environment and relative to people are striking, but one needs to dig into these issues in order to discover those differences. Our analysts do direct engagement with companies, direct engagement with NGOs. We document that to our files. We keep rigorous records. We're going to take an in-depth and rigorous examination of what a company does relative to a list of environmental issues that are most important to that particular company in its industry. We're going to examine a list of criteria and issues in terms of how that company interacts with society, and we're going to look at the governance systems that that company has in place that will assure its future behaviors. We also look at the risks that are posed to the company from the environment and the risks that are posed to the company from society. We score the company. We score the company relative to its appropriate peer set, and we keep that record. We have records going back well over a decade.
We make all of our investments within a universe of companies that are actively involved in what we call the resource optimization space, the environmental market space broadly defined. And we only work within that universe. Today it consists of about 1,500 companies, because we know that every company in that universe is making a positive contribution and should benefit from these changes in the global economy that we see taking place right now.
There is a direct feedback between the sustainability of a company's operations, how it interacts with society, and long-term profits. People are trying to understand how to adjust corporate governance systems to deal with the reality of doing business over the course of the next 100 years, where we're dealing with issues associated with a very crowded planet and a finite set of natural resources.
A big part of our work is shareholder advocacy, which is engaging with companies and really working with them to help them improve their environmental performance. So for instance, some of our recent work has been focused on palm oil. And this is a big cause of tropical deforestation, which not only is a big driver of climate change, but really eliminates endangered species habitat. So we've gotten Kellogg's, ConAgra. In fact, the whole industry has started to shift to realize that there are other opportunities. So you know, they have agreed to not use unsustainable palm oil. There's a certification to make sure that they're using palm oil that is truly sustainable. So we're really excited about that work.
We don't own fossil fuel companies because we feel that there are unmanageable risks that those company managements face. The fossil fuel business, in our opinion, is a business that lots of smart people are pointing against.
Bill McKibben and 350.org published an article in Rolling Stone really outlined the investment math related to climate change. So they looked at all of the fossil fuel reserves of energy companies across the world and realized that that amount of carbon stored in the ground was 5 times the amount of carbon that could safely be burned to stay within the scientific consensus to not have global temperature rise above 2 degrees Celsius. So that was a light bulb that I think went on in a lot of people's minds. Both of the funds are now fossil fuel free completely, so that means no investments in companies involved in the exploration, extraction, production, or refining of coal, oil, or gas.
They also pose unmanageable risks to the environment, and their behaviors are disrespectful of the rights of indigenous people around the world. There's just a very long list of issues associated with companies in the extractive industries that we don't think these companies can manage. They're not manageable. So we ask ourselves this question: if we were to engage and ask these companies to behave differently, what is the full list of changes we would want them to make? And can they even make those changes within the context of their business model? And the answer is we don't invest in them. There are an increasing number of very, very smart and highly motivated scientists who are trying to create other forms of energy and put the fossil fuel companies out of business.
I think that we're on the way, and I think that conferences like COP are absolutely important to making change.
If the good people who actually care about this did something and we all stood together as one and we united, then we could definitely change. But I also feel like we should educate those people who aren't aware.
People are certainly committed to learning more about it and to really understand how it's affecting their day-to-day life, how it's affecting other countries. People care about this.
It has to be taken into consideration that all of these points go hand in hand with one another, either directly or indirectly.
It's going to require big players like China and the United States to come together and put money into adaptation as well as mitigation funds.
There's no reason we can't apply this understanding of a balance between human and ecological needs right across the globe, and the benefits are really clear.
Listening is one thing, but doing is another thing, and it's the actions that we do that actually define what we're going to be, alleviating in terms of climate change.
There's ways to live off of the land in balance, and there's ways really to nurture other species while still considering your human needs.
I think the most important thing to talk about is how different countries and nations and communities can work together to make a change in climate and to raise the awareness or actually take action.
If we make an international framework for something, we should stick to it.
I don't want to just wait around and see how bad it's going to be in 10 years. I want to do something.
There's no doubt people need a rule and the laws to limit their behavior. I think it is better if we can set up more laws.
It just starts in our homes, and it just starts in our hearts. Like, you wouldn't throw an eggshell on the kitchen floor because you know that you're littering. So why would I throw it on my neighbor's lawn? I mean, like, it's important to have respect.
That what you're doing here is affecting people in other parts of the world. Maybe you don't know them, you don't know their name, but they're suffering anyways, right? So you should take an approach, be the man or the woman that I know you could be, and think for a change about everyone in the world. Because every human being's life counts.